and that was the process. But as I sat in the ballroom of the Edgewater Club, surrounded by friends and family, for a moment all conflicts between me and some of Madeline's family members were forgotten. Her brother made some silly toast, trying, but not succeeding, to say something funny and slightly insulting to me. It didn't get any laughs, and the whole thing fell flat. And then I didn't pay attention because there were many good toasts from others, including my brother Rich and a surprisingly sincere toast from John Washington. When I didn't have a home and needed help, this man, John nodded in my direction, reached out to me and helped me get back on my feet. I will always be grateful to him, and you, my friend, have become a brother to me. In this affluent WASP country club, to see this large black man giving such a moving toast was certainly a unique experience. I was glad to have friends like John. Even Robert joined in and gave his own toast. "Congratulations," he began. "Madeline, you are my only daughter, and I wish you joy, happiness, and success in life." No, still no acknowledgement to me, but by now I was used to it, and it didn't bother me. Later that evening, as the event was winding down and we were getting ready to leave for our honeymoon, I was given a big hug and a kiss on the cheek by Mandy's mom, Myra. But the most surprising thing was the brief hug from the old man. He must have been drunk, I thought, as the limo drove us away. One other thing about the wedding that I should note. About 30 days before the wedding, Madeline came home. We were living in my house by then, a little agitated, like she was upset about something. When I asked what was wrong, she told me that her father had insisted on a prenup. "What difference does it make, Maddie?" I said. "It only matters if we get divorced, and that's not going to happen." I told her. She reluctantly agreed, and we signed the contract. But as I pondered the legal form, two things bothered me. The first was that such a document felt as if it was preparing you for the collapse of the marriage. The second was that Robert was once again becoming an influence in our lives. Aside from a little trouble with her father, our married life together had been wonderful. We lived in a nice house that was 90% renovated, in a nice neighborhood. We were both successful in our careers, and money was not an issue for us. We had income and affluence. Maddie was much busier than I was, and her schedule was something we always had to plan for, but we learned to do it with minimal interruptions. I knew her career took up a lot of her time, and I was independent. I had my own business, gym, and home. I was also busy in my own way. One Wednesday night, a few months after we were married, Maddie had some sort of meeting. I was never sure which of her businesses was in law and which was in politics. The two activities seemed to intertwine. That night, John and Junior Washington, Rich, Dallas, and I gathered at a new bar near T-Mobile Park where the Mariners play. Boys' night out. The place was upscale, lots of guys in suits and women in professional attire. But it was in an old brick building next to an alley, and the atmosphere there was dark and shadowy. A place where you could meet someone on the verge of intimacy, but maybe not quite there yet. The five of us huddled in the corner of the bar, talking sports and stuff that the atmosphere didn't really affect. "Hey," Rich said at one point, "isn't that Madeline's brother? The guy who gave the awful toast at the wedding?" His head was turned back toward a booth in the restaurant section of the bar. I turned my head to look in the direction Rich was looking. "Sure," I said as it looked like he was following a blonde girl who was attractive but looked a little older than Ryan. I could see that he was really trying to charm this woman, and she was playing the game too. I noticed his unnatural smile and heard his fake laugh every now and then. I was around family and had seen Ryan enough to know what was sincere and what wasn't. We went back to our conversation, not paying much attention to my asshole son-in-law and his potential bed partner. After a while, I noticed that Rich's attention had left our conversation and focused on where we'd seen Ryan. Suddenly, Rich grabbed my hand. "Uh-oh," he said. "Looks like your buddy got caught with another man's woman." I turned to look. There were two guys there, angry-looking, both bigger than Ryan. They were crowded around the booth that Ryan and the blonde were occupying. I could see one of the guys focused on the blonde, and I could see her shaking her head back and forth in some sort of denial. The other guy was blocking Ryan's exit from the stall, his finger pointed at my brother-in-law. Suddenly, one of the guys grabbed the woman's arm, and the other guy yanked Ryan by the back of his coat, and they all walked out the side door. Ryan tried to fight back, but as I've noted before, he's a wimp. We all watched the drama unfold and knew what was going to happen next. One by one, they all turned and looked at me. Finally, John broke the silence. "I know you don't like this guy," he said, "but he gets his ass kicked, and he's Maddie's brother." I sighed and looked around the group. "Okay," I said. "Let's go save this asshole." We walked into the alley and saw Ryan trudging at the far end. He was on one knee, his coat was ripped open, and his mouth was bleeding. Two guys were nearby, but the woman was gone. It looked like his beating was still in its early stages. "Hey guys!" I shouted to them as we approached. "That's enough!" Both turned in our direction, and their angry expressions changed slightly when they saw us, especially me, John and Junior. "This is none of your business," one of them said. At this point, Ryan started to beg. "Billy, please," he began. "Help me. These two assholes are beating me up for no reason." Ryan pleaded. "Shut up, Ryan," I told him. "Look." I turned to both of them, holding out my palms in a pleading gesture. "I imagine what's going on, and he probably deserves it, but," I said, "I want to ask you for a personal favor. Would you please let him go?" They both looked at me. Then they looked back at our group. Then one of them looked at me again. "Hey, aren't you Billy Damon?" he asked. "I was at that Apple Cup when you guys kicked Husky's ass." A short discussion about the hated Huskies began. Finally, we all looked back at Ryan, who was still on his knees. Two of them looked at him, then at me. "Okay," one of them started. "I think we're done with him. But if I catch you near Tracy again, none of these guys can protect you." Ryan only nodded and apologized. "If you catch him with her again, I'll help you," John Washington told the guy. And that was the end of the situation. The two guys left. Ryan got to his feet and offered to buy us all a drink. "No thanks," I said. "It's getting late." "But Ryan, you better stop having fun like that, especially with married women. Those two could really screw you up," I continued. "And you know what? You'd deserve it." We all walked away and I looked back for a moment and saw Ryan standing alone in that alley looking completely lost. No, he wasn't his father, I thought, but that might be for the best. I didn't say a word about the encounter to Madeline or anyone else, but I noticed that Ryan was much friendlier when I met him at family gatherings. He and I never talked about the incident in the alley either, but I appreciated the newfound friendliness. I considered the next year a golden year. My business was doing well, I owned interests in over 20 properties and converted some to direct rentals and sold others. Both my cash flow and my wealth were in good standing. Several financial companies were even looking at me to see if I would be willing to sell all or part of my business. My relationship with Madeline continued to improve. She was happy with her job and some of the political stuff she was doing, and she was doing well. We discussed having children, but she said we needed to wait a while. I probably would have preferred to have children sooner, but I knew marriage was about compromises and sacrifices. The deep thread that Maddie kept talking about was the trust we had in each other. Trust in each other's decisions, trust in each other's goals, and most importantly, trust in each other's honesty. It helped avoid a lot of the silly conflicts that can arise in a marriage. One evening, a few months later, I realized that Maddie had a lot on her mind. She was abnormally quiet, not talking about the details of her day at the law office as she usually did. Finally, over a glass of wine, she told me what was on her mind. "Billy, the election for city attorney is 13 months away. If I'm going to run for that office, I'll need to declare within the next few weeks," she said. I sat back and watched her. I weighed how her running for office would affect us. I would see her even less often than I did now. If that's what she really wanted, I was all for it. I wondered about her father's influence on this decision. I rarely thought about her father and the fact that he resented me. It seemed to me that complaining to my wife about her father was whining. But I had a question for her. Maddie, I began, I just want to ask you, is this what you want or what your father wants? I asked. Upon hearing my question, I saw several emotions flash across her face. One of them was anger. It passed quickly, but it was there. Billy, this is what I really want. I really think I can make a difference in our town. Our current leadership doesn't take crime into account and doesn't protect the taxpayers who pay their salaries, she told me. It sounded less like a cause and more like a campaign slogan. Besides, Billy, she added, I'm really going to need your help when I do this. And I suppose that, without really discussing it, she made her decision. I tried to think positive about the situation. Maybe she could make a difference in our town, and maybe I could help. Later, thinking about it, I almost convinced myself that everything would be okay. At first, I was actively involved in the process. The fact that my work schedule wasn't too hectic helped. There were so many little things that needed to be done to prepare for the election. To become a candidate, you have to fill out and file a declaration of candidacy, meet the eligibility requirements at the time of filing, and be a registered voter in the county. Maddie met all of these requirements. The next step was the official announcement. The incumbent city attorney was a veteran judicial politician named Nord Gustafson. Nord came from an old, wealthy Seattle family. He was a registered Democrat and was not considered a hardcore crime fighter. That weekend, we gathered at Robert and Myra's home in Medina to celebrate Maddie's entry into the world of politics and discuss strategy. In addition to family, Robert invited several people with political experience. After dinner, we continued the discussion around the table. Or, let me correct, Robert dictated the conversation about Maddie's candidacy. The topic should be tough on crime, he reasoned. We should point out how soft the Old North has become and what has happened to our streets and neighborhoods. Now, he continued, we need people to work on the different parts of this campaign. And then Robert began to assign duties to different people. My name was not mentioned. Robert, I interjected, I'm willing to help in any way I can too. He looked at me, not quite frowning, but close to it. Of course, William, he began. I'll find something for you to do. And then he turned away dismissively, as if my contribution had no value. I couldn't escape the thought that this whole process would reflect badly on Madeline and me. On Monday night in the ballroom of the Governor Hotel, Madeline's campaign officially began in a few weeks. Robert knew how to raise money. We had it. I don't know why I said we. I was hardly involved in the process, and the campaign was going to be top-notch. There were brochures, campaign stickers, buttons, and yard signs. The campaign slogan read, "Trust Madeline to get the job done." The implication was that work doesn't get done, and Madeline is big on trust. At first, despite Robert, I worked almost every day at the campaign office in downtown Seattle. The campaign manager was a retired city commissioner named Bud Waxman. Working with Bud, I grew to love him. A few months into the campaign, with the election still almost a year away, Robert organized a poll. Bud told Robert and others that a poll taken too early has poor accuracy. He told Robert it was a waste of time. But Robert went for it anyway. The results did not please him. According to the preliminary results, North was ahead, and according to the poll, he had 60% of the vote. This sent Robert into a frenzy. Bud, he began, clearly angry, you've got to fix this quickly. Look, Robert, I know this is your first election. Don't worry, we still have plenty of time to get our message out to the voters, said Bud to Robert. I looked at my father-in-law as Bud said this and saw his face redden. I knew he was on the verge of exploding. Bud had broken the cardinal rule of dealing with Robert. Never agree with him. I knew firsthand the results of that act. The first few weeks were tense. Maddie and I still carved out some personal time for our relationship, and although it was less than it had been before the campaign, our bond was still strong. Probably a month after the first poll was taken, we were called to Madeline's parents' house for another political dinner. All the same people as before: her brother, her parents, a few close friends, but this time there was someone new. A guy probably about 5 years older than me, about 30. A good-looking man with model looks. Perfectly styled hair, light tan, teeth so white they almost catch your eye, and so confident that you could call him cocky. I had no idea who he was. When we sat down to dinner, Robert stood at the head of the table and announced, "I have some good news to share with our group tonight." Robert began to look left and right. "We're going to step up this campaign." A smile began to spread across his face. "I'd like to introduce the group to our new campaign manager, Brandon Tiffy," concluded Robert, turning to the cute guy and glowering. Tiffy stood up, unsuccessfully trying to feign modesty as Robert continued to speak. Brandon transferred to ISC's Seattle branch from our Washington, D.C. office. During his time in Washington, Brandon gained extensive knowledge of political campaign management. Although Brandon will be working for me at ISC full-time, most of his energy will be focused on the campaign, concluded Robert. After a moment, Ryan asked, "What about Bud?" I wondered the same thing. With his lips tightened and an assumed grim expression on his face, Robert answered the question. "Bud is a dear friend. He had a long and successful career," Robert said. "But in today's world, it was obvious that Bud's traditional ideas," he hesitated, "were a little old-fashioned. Brandon has run several successful political campaigns using modern methods. I think it will be very helpful to Maddie's success." Soon after that, dinner was over, and people began to chit-chat as they prepared to leave. I struck up a conversation with Ryan. "Wow," he said. "I was surprised to hear about Bud." "Me too," I answered him. Robert's fingerprints were all over it. I turned to find Maddie and say goodbye to her. I saw her, her father, and Tiffy huddled together at the far end of the room. I waddled over there. I stepped into the small group. Robert looked up, an annoyed expression flashing across his face as he noticed me, and then, ignoring me, returned to the conversation. "Billy Damon," I said, extending my hand towards Tiffy. Deep in conversation with Maddie, he looked up, and then it was as if he'd been illuminated. His handsome face seemed to light up as he turned his attention to me. Maybe it was the ultra-white teeth, but for some reason his whole face seemed to light up. "Billy," he began, saying my name and squeezing my hand with both of his. "I've heard so much about you," he purred. I could imagine what Robert had said to him about me. After a few brief final words, Maddie and I left. "That was a real surprise," I said in the car on the way home. Maddie sat there without answering, apparently immersed in thought. "Did you know this was going to happen?" I asked. She paused, as she often does, gathering her thoughts and mulling over her answer. "Dad was talking about the change," she said, looking out the window. "He was concerned about the poll results. I didn't realize he was going to do it so soon." I was now sitting in thoughtfulness. Finally, I spoke up. "Do you want this guy, Tiffy?" I asked. "Were you unhappy with Bud?" She answered almost immediately, with a note of surprise in her voice. "Billy, I need to win this election. I have plans beyond this office. Daddy thinks there may be an opportunity to run for mayor in the future. There are times along the way when we need to make a change. Bud was something we needed to change," she told me. It sounded like her father was speaking. I was disturbed by the events of the evening. Her plans for a future political position, the effect it could have on our future family, her father manipulating our lives again, and finally Tiffy. I saw his type and didn't trust him. For now, I kept quiet about these thoughts. For the next few months, life remained fairly monotonous. Tiffy rarely showed up at the campaign office. It was run by a woman on the payroll. Her name was Rose Greenberg. She was efficient and experienced. When Rose came into the office, she'd give you a job and leave. Madeline was rarely home before 9 p.m. on weekdays. Weekends were a little better, but it got crowded. Maddie always assured me that things would change after the election. In the weeks after Tiffy took over as campaign manager, Madeline often mentioned his name. During our evening conversations about the events of our days, she often mentioned Brandon Tiffy. We would often banter about his soap opera looks and make remarks like, "Do you think he wears makeup?" But as time went on, my joking comments about him were no longer joined by Maddie. Our connection became increasingly strained. I tried to figure out if this was a temporary situation related to the campaign, or if it was something more permanent, a change in Madeline and I's relationship. Throughout our marriage, and even before, I had been less inclined to react to every little thing that might have bothered me. I believed that most small issues resolved themselves. Sometimes, you can take a small issue and discuss it to the point where it magnifies. So far in our relationship, this approach was working. I certainly understood that Maddie's busy work schedule combined with the stress of the campaign often had her on edge. I also knew that political office was important to her. When I hinted a couple times that our connection was waning, she immediately blamed it on the stress of campaigning. I hoped she was right. She often hosted political events in the evenings. I tried to attend them whenever possible. Maddie and I would enter the room holding hands and then split up, with her going to the front of the room where some sort of podium was set up, and me retreating to the back of the room as an observer. There was an event at a very active neighborhood association that was unhappy with the amount of local crime. I moved to the back of the building again, where mostly middle-aged and older people were gathered. Maddie was introduced and had already started to speak when suddenly the door behind me opened and someone squeezed into the crowded building. A moment later, I received a poke in the back. "Hello, Jolly Green Giant," the voice began. I was wearing a green sweater. "Why don't you switch seats so we can both see?" she said to me. I looked down and saw a short, dark-haired woman with beautiful eyes and a wide smile on her face. I nodded in agreement, and we switched places in the crowded room. I noticed she had a notepad and pen. Eventually, Maddie's speech and all the questions were over. I knew she would be shaking everyone's hands for another 15 minutes. Suddenly, a short woman turned to me. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" the short woman asked me. "My name is Billy Damon," I began, "and I'm—" "Oh, I know you," she interrupted. "You're the husband." Before I could confirm, she quickly held out her hand. "Lisa Katz, Seattle Times, political columnist." She smiled at me. "Nice to meet you," I said. "How are you enjoying the campaign?" she began. And then it was like she was interviewing me, inundating me with questions at a mile-a-minute pace. But I have to say it was done in a friendly, positive manner, and in that short meeting I liked her. She was attractive, and I'm not very good at identifying such things, but there was a distinct gay vibe coming from her. I usually picked Maddie up myself from events like this, but this time she had to seek me out. I was just talking to Lisa when Maddie walked up. I noticed Tiffy lingering in the background. I introduced Maddie to Lisa, and Maddie turned on the charm as soon as she realized what Lisa was up to. Tiffy, always eager to be the center of attention, cut into the discussion, almost shoving in front of me. The whole impromptu meeting only took about 5 minutes, and as we were leaving, Lisa called out to me. "It was nice to meet Billy," and smiled broadly at me. And then Maddie told me that she and Brandon needed to go back to the office and work on something for tomorrow. Things like this were happening more and more often. I still couldn't shake my dislike and distrust of Tiffy. He reminded me of the backup quarterback who played for the Cougars when I was a senior in high school. The guy had talent and a lot of confidence, but he would often change the game at the last minute and try to play out some sensational scene that made him look good. About half the time the play worked, but the other half had ended up being an interception or him getting knocked down and losing a few yards. The guys on the team didn't trust him, but there was a certain type of girl who was attracted to that bravado. And this guy, I can't even remember his name, tried to take advantage of as many of those girls as he could. I think it was the cocky look on his face that attracted him the most. Tiffy had the same expression. By 11 p.m. I went to bed. Maddie still wasn't home. Later, shortly after midnight, I was half awakened by Maddie fussing around me getting ready for bed. Not quite awake yet, I felt the bed stir as she sat up, and instinctively, in a semi-conscious state, I turned towards her. As I turned, I noticed something. but didn't have time to register it before I fell into sleep. The next day, I was in just my underwear, looking at my iPad, unshaven and unwashed, long before Maddie showed up. I wanted to know her schedule for the day, but Maddie doesn't like mornings. I waited for her to come downstairs. This morning, she was quieter and more hurried than usual. Her glance in my direction as she entered the kitchen was minimal. When I asked her about her schedule, she barely answered me. Is something wrong? I asked, as it felt like more than just a morning grumble. I have a million things to do. I don't have time to go over my entire schedule with you, she began, starting to get worried. And some of us have to look professional during the day. And then she nodded in my direction. We had discussed the difference in our jobs and the difference in professionalism before, but usually it was in a joking manner. This was the first time it sounded like a criticism. I was just looking at her, trying to figure out what was really going on. She paid no attention to me, fidgeting about to leave. As she was walking out the door, I called out to her, "Have a good day." Her response was silence. As I continued to go about my business, I analyzed what had happened over the past 24 hours or so. I knew Maddie could be moody, especially in the mornings, but usually by the evening her mood had normalized and the mild unpleasantness was not brought up. We'll see if that happens today. Something else popped into my head. It was a vague memory that I had no way of grasping. I had spent the day reciting part of my garage. Throughout the day, I tried to remember exactly what it was that was lodged in my brain. I hadn't heard from Maddie all day, and when I saw her drive up a little before 6 in the evening, I started to think we could spend a normal evening together for a change. I took 20 minutes to clean myself up and put my tools away. When I entered the house, it was clear she was upstairs. I never got bored of climbing the front stairs centered in the middle of my entryway. Halfway upstairs, I heard the shower running. I quietly walked into the bathroom. "I scared her," she said. "Billy, no. I have to be in Ballard by 7 o'clock. Brandon will pick me up in 20 minutes. Suddenly, everything changed. "Billy, go away!" She was truly angry. "Grow up and think about something," she added. I stepped out of the shower in silence, but an anger I hadn't felt in a long time was building. I saw a change in my wife that I wasn't prepared for. As I slowly dressed and walked down the stairs, I pondered the changes I had observed. One thought made me stop halfway down the stairs. She was becoming like her father. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. It's Tiffy. Standing in the doorway is Brandon Tiffy, resplendent in his dark suit, starched white shirt, and matching tie. I catch a glimpse of myself in a tattered gray t-shirt, paint-splattered pants, and flip-flop sandals. Some contrast. "Billy, what a beautiful house you have," he said loudly. He walked through the archway into the living room, touched the wood trim, and looked up at the crown molding ceiling. It looked like he was mentally taking inventory of my house. At that moment, Maddie came hurriedly down the stairs. "Brandon," she began, "we have to go." Then, throwing a brief glance over her shoulder, she said, "I'll see you later, Billy." I watched them walk away in silence. Through the open front door, I saw Maddie look back at me with a slight worry in her face. Then I saw Tiffy gallantly open the passenger side door for her. And then he looked at me again. The smug expression on his face turned to a smirk as he closed her door. I knew that look. He was challenging me. Sometime in the near future, I was going to have a very frank conversation with Maddie. I didn't mind keeping quiet and staying out of it to some extent. But when this smarmy asshole, her dad's buddy, challenges me in my house, it was too much. I needed a drink, and when I opened the liquor cabinet and saw the bottle of gin that Maddie used for martinis, the little stray nugget of information I'd been thinking about suddenly became clear. When she got home late last night, I vaguely recall turning toward her as she went to bed. Then I noticed the smell of gin on her breath. I realized I'd stayed up late with Tiffy and was getting ready to campaign. But what I didn't realize was that she'd rather drink with presumably this guy than go home to her husband. We were soon to have that conversation. I ended up sending her a request to meet this Friday at 8 p.m. at our house. I find it ridiculous that I have to work around my wife's schedule. Topic: a few things. I was a little surprised when I got an I accept response pretty quickly. Perhaps she realized the gravity of the situation. The meeting between Maddie and me did not go well. No. It started out with her admitting that she works a lot and doesn't pay enough attention to our marriage, and I appreciated that. But when we got down to specifics, long-term plans, family, her father's interference in our lives, and finally Tiffy, she got defensive. This caused the biggest fight in our marriage. It ended with her yelling at me, "Why can't I support her?" And me retorting, "You need to make a choice." After which we went to sleep in separate rooms. Things thawed out a bit over the next few days, but there was still a big chasm in our relationship. One thing I noticed was that Tiffy wasn't mentioned anymore, and at first I thought that was a good thing. Later I realized that it wasn't. The next week I was at another neighborhood rally. There was a large banner hanging on the side of the building that read, "Trust Madeline to get the job done." Even though we were in a state of Cold War, I still felt the need to support her. I also wanted to keep an eye on Tiffy. It was a typical event where Maddie promised to fight crime harder and increase protection for citizens. After it was over, Lisa Katz from the newspaper suddenly appeared. "Hey, big guy," she began with a wide, infectious smile on her face. "How's it going?" she asked. We chatted for a few minutes about the campaign and more general topics. I don't know if it had to do with her profession, but I had a faint but uncomfortable feeling like I was being interviewed. Finally, she asked me a specific question. "Hey," she said, "who's that slick dude?" And she nodded toward Tiffy. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He's always around, and he has that look," she said. "What look?" I asked, but I was already guessing what she was talking about. "You know, the look of a man and a woman," she said, and searched my face for a reaction. I didn't say anything back. "Billy, just because I don't like men doesn't mean I don't know how they act," she told me. I gave her a brief hug and said, "I know what you mean, Lisa, but it's okay." And then I started my exit. "Billy, let's have lunch next week and chat," she said to me as I left. "I'll call you." I nodded, then wondered if I had even given her my number. As the election approached, even our brief time together over the weekend seemed to fade away. Our lives had come to naught. If it weren't for this political campaign, I might have suspected something. And although I wanted to end these thoughts, I couldn't do it. I think it was at this point that I began to realize the precarious position our relationship was in. The election was still a few months away, and several things happened that affected our relationship. On Monday, I got a call from my brother Rich. Rich was very excited. He had proposed to Leslie. "Billy," he began, "we're having an engagement party Friday night at the Reef. We've reserved the back bar. There will be a lot of people there, and I really want you and Maddie to be there." "Rich, I agree," I said. "Congratulations. You know Maddie's schedule these days. I'll make sure she comes," I told him. "Billy, it's very important that you and Maddie are there. I want you to be my best man," he told me. I understood how important this was to Richie. Maddie and I were his family, and he wanted to share his happiness with those closest to him. Surprisingly, I managed to get through to Maddie when I called her to tell her about Richie's engagement. There was still some distance between us, but when she heard about Rich and Leslie, she perked up. "When is it going to be?" she asked. I told her when and where, and she asked me to wait while she checked her busy calendar. "You know," she began, "this could work. I might be a little late, but I just plan to meet you there," she told me. I thanked her. I thought maybe things were getting better. She understood how much her presence at this event meant to me. Rich was beyond excited, knowing Maddie's busy schedule and that she had prioritized her and Leslie's holiday. I arrived at the Reef early, helped set up the decorations, and even bought a cake. A little before 7 o'clock, people started arriving. Rich and Leslie walked in right at 7, and I could see how happy he was to be surrounded by loved ones. "Leslie and I are going to recreate the proposal in front of everyone, but I want to wait until Maddie gets here," he told me. I checked my watch. 7:15. I knew she was usually a little late. At 7:45, I called her. Voicemail. At 8 o'clock, Rich asked me where she was. I called again 15 minutes later. The result was the same. A few minutes later, I approached Rich. Rich, it looks like Maddie is busy with something. You better make an offer now while everyone else is here, I told him. He looked at me silently. Disappointment flashed in his eyes for a moment, but then he agreed. For the rest of the evening, I went about my normal behavior, not revealing my unhappiness with my wife. My mind was constantly spinning with thoughts of how important her trust was to her, and how in many ways my confidence in that trust was wavering. The party ended around 10 p.m., and by the time I got to my car in the Reef parking lot, it was probably around 10:30 p.m. Before I could even leave the premises, my phone rang. Maddie. Billy, she began. There was some commotion going on in the background. It was hard to hear. I've got great news, she continued. We've just read the latest polls. I'm up 56% against North's 39%. Billy, that's such great news, she exclaimed. I remained silent. Billy, you're here. Did you hear what I said? She asked. Maddie, I said in a quiet and calm voice, you really disappointed Rich tonight. He expected you to be at the engagement party. I deliberately used the word she valued so much. Trust. Oh, that's right. That was tonight. I'm sorry. I'll send them both a note apologizing. She said, It's just that my dad asked me to do this survey, and the results started coming in late tonight. That's really good news. Her voice rose. She was excited about the results. I paused for a moment before replying. Congratulations, I told her quietly. She could tell I wasn't happy. Oh, Billy, she began. I'll make it up to them. We're meeting at the governor's bar for a celebratory drink. Please come down, she begged. Before I could respond, a voice came. Maddie, let's go. I was sure it was Tiffy. I disconnected the call. I knew that when Maddie decided to run for office, something would have to be sacrificed. I also knew that by marrying Madeline, something would have to be sacrificed even before she ran for office. But so far, the sacrifices I've made have been visible, and Maddie has shown me that she appreciates them. That seems to be changing. I had assumed we would toast the governor, and that would be the end of it. I planned to have a calm but serious conversation on a few topics when she got home. Mentally, I had already thought through what I wanted to say. The problem was that she never came home. I ended up going to bed at 1:30, sleeping restlessly and waking up at 6:45. I checked the spare bedrooms in the entryway. She wasn't home. I got worried. I called her phone and left a voicemail message. Maddie, are you okay? Please call me. About an hour later, I got a message. I'm fine. We'll be home later. My anxiety started to turn to anger, but I kept my cool. Eventually, she came home, looking tired and hungover. Up until a few months ago, I wouldn't have had any questions as to why she had been out all night. On this day, I didn't have that certainty. The one major thing we had talked about in the beginning was trust. Now, cracks were starting to appear in my trust. She came down in her robe after her shower, still looking tired. I just want to spend a quiet day at home. No phones, no interviews, no one needs me for anything. She sank down onto the couch, closing her eyes and pressing her hand to her forehead. I stood in the doorway, leaning against the archway and watched her, silently, studying her. She wasn't going to get off that easy. So what happened last night? I asked quietly. Still the same familiar hesitancy, but this time she was carefully intertwining the facts with what she wanted to reveal to me. Finally, she answered. Earlier in the week, my dad ordered a survey, but Brandon didn't tell me about it. In the middle of the day, Dad came to the office to wait for the results of the poll. To the campaign office? I asked. No, we rented space in the building next to the governor's, she told me. I also remembered, and I can't remember where I heard this, but it was the same building where Tiffy lived. Maybe his apartment was an office? She then gave me a hurried version of events. Her father, Brandon, and a few others kept getting positive information about how she was being interviewed. At one point, someone opened a bottle of champagne, and eventually the group from the office and a few others headed to the lobby bar at the Governor Hotel. "Billy, I'm so sorry I forgot about Rich and Leslie," she told me. The fact that she had missed Rich's engagement party now began to seem insignificant compared to what else might have happened last night. "Okay," I said. "So what's next?" "What?" she asked. "Well," I began, "we've gone from going to the governor's office to you, arriving after a long night away from home." Suddenly she looked at me, saw that I was watching her, and turned away. "My fault?" "I drank too much and crashed downtown," she said. "Okay," I told her, still calmly. "Any details?" She was silent for a minute. "Are you accusing me of something?" Now her voice raised. "You don't trust me? I made a decision after celebrating an important event, and now I have to account for myself." Now she was angry, but that wasn't quite right. "I don't need to explain myself to you or anyone else," she shouted. "When I was a sophomore at WSU, I had to take an English exam, so I took a class called Shakespeare's Hamlet, the Ghost. I loved that class, and I retained some of the moments. I remembered one phrase from the play that went like this: 'The lady doth protest too much.' The meaning was perfectly clear, and that's what I felt was happening here today." To hide her potential guilt, she feigns indignation at my question. "I really hope we can discuss the events of last night in peace," I told her in a calm tone. With those words, she abruptly stood up without looking me in the eye and walked up the front stairs to the second floor, and I heard the door slam. For the rest of the weekend, we didn't actually speak. By Monday, our communication had become minimal. Monday morning, I was touring a potential house in Tacoma. I received an interesting phone call. I didn't recognize the number. The area code wasn't local. "Good morning, Bill. My name is Elliot Boucher from Global Management. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" he asked. He told me that Global Management was a large investment firm with many affiliates, and he was interested in talking to me about my business. I had received similar inquiries over the years, and while they were flattering, I wasn't interested in selling. "Thank you for your interest, Mr. Boucher," I began. "But I'm not interested in selling my business." I told him this, thinking that this was practically the end of the conversation. "Bill," he said, "I realize you've built something great, but I'm not talking about buying you out. I have other ideas." He continued, "Just meet me for lunch on Wednesday. I have a few things I'd like to discuss with you." I was curious, so I accepted the lunch invitation. This could be interesting, I thought. On Tuesday night, Madeline announced that she had a rally downtown on Wednesday and would be home late. I think she was trying to put me at ease by letting me know her schedule in advance. But it didn't work. I still feel I should have been given a more detailed explanation about the past weekend. She also told me that her father had planned another dinner on Sunday night, a sort of celebration of the poll news. I didn't want to go, but such events were mandatory. I met Elliot Boucher at Nouvelle Bistro in downtown Seattle at 1 p.m. Boucher didn't look like Tiffy or even Robert, my father-in-law. He had dark-rimmed glasses, a suit but no tie, and a serious, intelligent look. My first impression was positive. After a few pleasantries, we got down to business. "Bill, Global is in the business of managing money for large organizations, such as pension funds and public investments. It would be unusual for us to work with individuals." He continued, "We are always looking for different ways to maximize returns for our clients. I've heard about your growth and seen what you've achieved. It's impressive." I was flattered, but wary at the same time. "Elliot," I began, "thank you for your comments, but I don't want to sell my business." I told him that again. He then continued his explanation. He didn't want to buy 100% of my business, only a percentage. He said he didn't care. As long as I kept the majority, we would work it out. He wanted me to work for him and set up a real estate department in one of their local offices. He talked about the opportunities I would get by keeping a percentage in my business and watching it grow. I was interested. We ended up talking for several hours. He said he was going to prepare something and give it to me by the end of the week. I was definitely interested. I decided I wanted to go to Maddie's rally tonight, not so much to support her, but to keep my eyes on her. I sat in one of the many Starbucks in Seattle and reflected on recent events in my life while waiting for the start time of tonight's political rally. I wondered if my marriage was falling apart, and if not, what the implications would be for Maddie and my life if she ran for mayor in the future. Then I thought about Tiffy, or rather, Maddie and Tiffy. Is there something going on? Knowing Maddie, it seemed unlikely, but surely the signs were there. Finally, I wondered about the meeting with Elliot Boucher. Of everything that was going on in my life right now, this was the only positive. The political rally had reconvened in the large conference room of the Governor Hotel. A dim light burned in the back. I was sure Maddie was unaware of my presence. I was in the unlit back of the room, effectively hidden from the bright stage lights. The perfect place to watch the action and consider Madeline and Tiffy. The spotlight was aimed at Maddie as she moved toward the podium. Large banners. Believe Madeline. In front of the large banners. I saw Tiffy and Robert on one side of the podium. They were whispering amongst themselves, triumphant smiles shining on their faces. They thought they had won this election. And in that moment, it seemed that they had. Maddie spent the next 30 minutes talking about how she would get tough on crime, how we must clean up the streets and not let criminals get off easy. There must be deterrence for criminals. And so on and so forth. I had heard it all so many times that I was getting bored with it. Suddenly, I felt a nudge in my side. "Hey, big guy," it was Lisa Katz, the reporter. "I hear you're getting positive poll numbers." "That's what they say," I replied. I think Lisa noticed my less than enthusiastic response. She studied me for a moment, her dark eyes scanning my face. "That's not what I'd call a big guy's winning expression," she told me. At that moment, she looked at her iPhone, an incoming call. "I gotta go, Billy. Give me a call. Let's have lunch. I know a great restaurant. You have my number." She looked at me and eventually disappeared into the crowd. Things were getting quiet on stage, and I turned my attention to Maddie. Tiffy was standing next to her and smiling, flashing his white teeth. I saw him whisper something in her ear. A few people from the audience approached her to ask questions. I followed her body language, both of them, Maddie and Tiffy. There was a sense of pleasant familiarity between them. They were cramped in each other's personal space, but perhaps to an outside observer, they didn't look out of place. But I could see the shared glances. Small signs of intimacy between them. The loving closeness that was sorely lacking in my relationship with Maddie seemed to have been replaced by closeness with Tiffy. I realized that this was the end of the event, and I wanted to continue watching Maddie and Tiffy. Sure, it was an amateur investigation, but I needed to gather as many facts as possible. I found a darkened doorway in one of the buildings on the street from where I could watch them leave the meeting hall. October officially began the rainy season in the Puget Sound area. It will stay that way until May. I don't usually like rain, but today it helped my covert observations. After a while, I saw them leave the meeting room and hustle across the street, heads down to shelter from the rain. Tiffy threw his coat over Maddie's back. At first, I couldn't tell if he was hugging her or just throwing his coat over her to protect her from the rain. When they reached the awning of the house next door to the governor's, the coat fell off Maddie's back. But now his arm was unmistakably around her. And as they entered the building, I saw that her arm went around his waist. Seeing this intimate contact brought me to a halt in the middle of the street in downtown Seattle. Up until that point, her and Tiffy's life together was only a distant theory. Nothing had been officially confirmed yet, but from my observations, there had been a major shift in my confidence in the marriage. As I walked back to my parked car, I noticed the time, 8:21 p.m. A surge of sadness came over me as I thought about what I saw tonight. It seemed to me that my marriage to this woman I cared for and continue to care for was slipping away. And slipping away was what she always told me was so important. Trust. When I got home, I was overwhelmed with sadness. There was anger, of course, and for obvious reasons, Tiffy was the main target, followed by Robert. But more than anything, I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to see if there was any way to repair our crumbling marriage. One thing was certain. If I found out she was having fun with Tiffy, it would be over. I planned to have an objective conversation with her and wanted straight answers. But by 10 p.m., sitting and waiting, the fatigue from all the emotions of the day caught up with me, and I fell into a dead sleep in the living room. Waking up Thursday morning, I was disoriented. The events of the previous day slowly resurfaced in my mind. The excitement of meeting Elliot Boucher had been negated by what I had witnessed at the political rally and afterward. I could tell that Maddie was home, but it couldn't have been before 10. 15, that was the last thing I remembered checking the time before I dozed off. The big question was, what was she doing sometime between 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. last night? Over the next few days, I tried to talk to Maddie a few times, but I wanted the conversation to be brief and not rushed. With the phone constantly ringing and her busy schedule as the election approached, the right time kept not coming up. That time would come, I promised myself, and soon. In those days, I was mentally beginning to pull away from marriage. It made me sad just thinking about it, but at some point in any situation where the end may be near, you begin to make alternative plans. I began to envision a life without Maddie. It was a sad thought. By Sunday evening, we still weren't together enough to talk. Tonight was an optional family dinner at Robert and Myra's. Maddie and I went there together, being alone together for the first time in over a week. I knew this wasn't the time to ask her in detail about Wednesday night and what she and Tiffy had done after the political rally. Instead, I told her about my meeting with Elliot Boucher for the first time. She seemed genuinely interested in the event. On Friday, Elliot emailed me his proposal. There were actually different options in the proposal. The one that interested me the most was the one in which Global was buying 67% of my company, at a very generous price. I would then sign a 5-year employment contract to work in a branch office of one of their local offices. The salary package would be in the 6-figure range, and on top of that, there would be a profit share and an annual bonus. I'll have Landon review the offer next week, I told Maddie. Billy, that's exciting, she said, and sighed. Once the election is over, we'll need to reunite. You'll just have to be patient with me. I didn't say anything back. I wondered if there was any chance our marriage would survive. Little bells of hope tinkled optimistically. Maybe it could work out. I promised myself again that if she had sex with Tiffy, it was definitely over. As we walked into her parents' house in Medina, I experienced a mixture of emotions. Her father, Robert, was in high spirits during dinner. The same company was still here. Her family, including her brother Ryan, a few influential family friends, and of course Robert's golden boy, Brandon Tiffy. We all gathered in small groups in the living room for cocktails before dinner. I spent the entire time talking to Ryan. It was a little weird. Ever since we helped Ryan that night in the alley, he had become a much nicer person. Gone was the fake bravado. His humility was refreshing. I noticed one interesting thing. At one point, I saw him looking at Tiffy. Tiffy was talking to one of Robert's friends. The latter said something, and Tiffy burst into fake laughter. It was so obvious that I glared at the smiling asshole. Just as Tiffy's loudness caught my attention, Ryan noticed too and looked up at the loud interruption. I watched the slight expression on Ryan's face turn into a bitter grimace as he looked at Tiffy. I knew that Ryan, Tiffy, and Robert worked together at ISC. I just hadn't given much thought to how they interacted in the workplace. Judging by the look on Ryan's face, I could guess that this interaction was not a positive one. There's an old Middle Eastern proverb that goes something like this: "The enemy of your enemy is your friend." I may have just found a new ally. At the dinner, Robert was in rare form. Buoyed by the positive results of the polls, Robert ranted as if Maddie had already won the election. Blushing face, wide smile, glass of wine in hand, he addressed his guests. "What my little girl has accomplished," he began, and then looked at Maddie, "is simply incredible. When that young lady decides to do something, by God, she does it. He raised his glass to Tiffy's applause. I've never been more impressed with a young person than Madeline, he proclaimed. Sitting on the far end of the table, I noticed the look on Ryan's face. I imagined throughout their childhood, Madeline had always been the favorite child. Ryan had never lived up to his father's high standards. My thoughts were interrupted by Robert's further statements. With the election only a few weeks away, I want to thank all of you for your support. His eyes traveled around the table, never meeting mine or Ryan's. The message was clear. We were overlooked and unneeded. It was interesting. I disliked Ryan for so long that I hadn't noticed his low status in my own family. It made me love him even more. And one person who was instrumental in Madeline's success, Robert continued, turning to Tiffy with an even bigger smile. Brandon, my boy. He patted him on the shoulder. We're all so grateful to you for being here and for everything you've done. While Robert was saying all of this, I saw Ryan almost cringe at the copious praise addressed to Tiffy. Words like that, my intuition told me, were something Ryan rarely saw. But that wasn't all I noticed. My gaze shifted to my wife. While her father continued to praise Tiffy, her eyes gazed at him with adoration. I knew that look. I was the one who usually got those looks from her. Not so much lately, I thought. And then I turned to Tiffy. He was looking at Madeline with such love and lust in his eyes, as if they were the only two people in the room. My musings were interrupted by Robert. Friends, family, everyone, he announced in a voice that rang throughout the dining room. A toast! And he raised his wine glass. Trust Madeline, he repeated his toast to her campaign slogan. Half-heartedly raising my glass, I realized something. Ironically, I didn't trust Maddie anymore. I couldn't bring myself to finish my toast. I noticed Ryan, who was still looking at Tiffy without raising his glass, and didn't even join the toast, confirming everything I'd seen today about this relationship. Dinner broke shortly afterward, and I retreated to the far end of the living room in search of privacy, trying to untangle my various thoughts about the previous evening. As I stared out into the dark October night, I was interrupted. It was Ryan. Billy, I need to talk to you. He said it with a slight tinge of urgency. Ryan, what's up? I asked. Not here, he said. He looked around, as if he wanted to make sure no one else could hear. Tomorrow at lunch, he told me. I'll get back to you. It's important. And then he walked quickly out without another word. I wanted to leave too. I was sick of Robert and Tiffy and the whole scene. I went to get Madeline. I saw her with her father, Tiffy, and another man I didn't know. They were all huddled together and talking passionately about something. I approached them from the edge. For a minute or so, they continued their private conversation, and then Maddie looked up at me. Her father followed her gaze and looked at me with irritation on his face. William, he began impatiently, we're going to be a while. Brandon and I can make sure Madeline gets home safely. It may be late. He said this and turned away, pulling me aside. Maddie, are you okay? I asked. She nodded. I walked out of the group, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the look in Tiffy's eyes, and it took all my willpower not to flick the gloating smirk off his face. Bye, Billy, Maddie called out to me as I left. I ignored her. Up until a week ago, I would have trashed and scandalized her about this evening, but now I was beginning to realize that I didn't really care that much. Maddie was a woman of strong character who I believe felt strongly about me and our marriage, but she was focused on the goal. Add to that her strong-willed father, who had his own agenda, and Tiffy, and the combination created instability. That night, despite my cluttered thoughts, I slept surprisingly well, and by the time I got up, Maddie was gone. In the morning, I received a text message and 2 phone calls. The text was from Ryan, asking me to meet him at Dave's Diner in Ballard at noon. I confirmed to him that I would be there. Moments later, my cell phone rang. It was Elliot Boucher from Global. We exchanged pleasantries, and then he cut to the chase. First thoughts on the proposals? He asked me. I explained that I had an interest and that I was going to have my attorney look into the information. Billy, this is great news, he told me. I want you to meet someone. This is our senior vice president for the Americas, Alan Jordan. How do you feel about Wednesday? Either in person here in Santa Clara or at Zoom, he said. I thought for a moment. With everything going on back home, I'd rather not leave town. I told him Zoom would suit me just fine. He told me to plan for 11 a.m. and he would send me the information. As soon as I hung up, the phone rang again. Oddly enough, it was Maddie. I'm sorry about last night, she told me. I didn't know what exactly she was apologizing for, but there were several options. Before I could respond, she asked how I was doing. It was weird. Even at our best times, it seemed uncharacteristically polite. She must really feel guilty about something or someone else. Things are actually going pretty well at Global, I told her. We briefly discussed the possibility as we drove to her parents' house on Sunday. Elliot wants me to meet a guy named Alan Jordan on Wednesday this week, I added. Pretty quickly, almost with excitement in her voice, she asked when I was going to leave. I was about to tell her it would be a meeting with Zoom, but hesitated. Then I told her I would be in the Bay Area on Wednesday and would be back on Thursday. She wanted to know all the details of my trip. Pretty weird. I began to ponder why this information was so important to her. I told her I would contact her about it. I began to formulate a plan. If there was something going on between her and Tiffy, I wanted to find out as soon as possible. I was curious about the lunch meeting with Ryan. He and I had never socialized except for family events. But like I said, lately he seemed like a much more humble and decent man than the cocky reflection of his father he was trying to be. Billy, I have to tell you that you helped me change my life, he began. Change your life? This was getting weirder and weirder. After the night you saved me, when those guys were beating me up, he said, I started to evaluate my life. I started thinking about the lives I might have ruined by getting involved with all those women, especially the married ones. I thought about the families, the children, and the people I might have hurt for my cheap thrills. I felt disgusted with myself. Wow, I thought. At first I thought he was kidding me, but no, he was serious. He was almost crying. I was confused and couldn't find the words. I just wanted to thank you for helping me reevaluate my life and my values, he said. I told him you were welcome. And then there was a pause. I wondered why he couldn't just tell me that after dinner at my parents' house. Ryan took a deep breath and continued. Billy, there's more to it. You need to know more, said Ryan. Okay, I thought. Whatever he was going to say, he had me interested. 1. Brandon Tiffy is an arrogant jerk, and my dad thinks he can do no wrong, said Ryan bitterly. I agreed with that. 2. And you probably know this. You, he paused, were never my father's first choice as a husband for Maddie. Yeah, I knew that, and probably wouldn't even make the top 100. Finally, no matter how independent Maddie was, my father always had a great deal of influence over her. Her marriage to you is one of the only things she did against his wishes. He told me. Okay, I said. But Ryan, it sounds like there might be more to this story, said I. He nodded with a grim expression on his face. Maddie and Brandon are together a lot. You know, ISC, our company, has an apartment for out-of-town clients at the Regis next door to the Governor Hotel. I nodded affirmatively. I knew that. But you might not know that's where Brandon lives. It's also their unofficial private campaign office, he continued, and my sister and him go there a lot. And Billy, they're usually alone. I haven't seen anything specific, but I've seen them together. I've also seen my sister over the years with guys, and of course you. I know her looks, and I've seen her look at Brandon the same way. He told me. I sat back and digested what Ryan had said. Even though none of this really surprised me, it still hurt. I knew that Maddie and I had had an uneven relationship lately, but I kept hoping that it was due to the pressure of the campaign. Like I said, if I found out she was having fun with Tiffy, it would be over. One last thing regarding Brandon, Ryan turned to me. And this doesn't apply to you specifically, but there have been some irregularities in his client accounts. I've heard that the auditors have started looking into it. I know it may not concern you directly, but it gives you an idea of his character, added Ryan. Of course it does, I thought. Even the first time I'd met Tiffy, I'd realized I didn't trust him. What Ryan told me confirmed many of my suspicions. As we got up to leave, I thanked Ryan for providing the information. Billy, I'm the one who should be thanking you, he said to me as we both left the restaurant. On the drive home, all the pieces of my plan started to fall into place. In the afternoon, I got a call from my attorney, Landon Kirsch. He went over the contract with Global and said it was pretty straightforward. Billy, he told me, if you put your mind to it, you're going to be a rich man, richer than you already are. Yeah, I know, I said. And one more thing, Billy, Landon added. You know that Global owns ISC, the firm your father-in-law works for. Ha, I thought. I didn't know that. This could all get very interesting. Early Wednesday morning, I packed a bag for my fictitious trip to San Francisco. I left the house, but instead of SeaTac Airport, I drove to Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I chose a silver, unmarked Nissan. I followed Maddie to work at her law firm. Their parking lot was across the street, and I found a spot from where I could watch both the entrance to her building and the parking lot. I settled in for the morning. At 11 a.m., I logged onto my iPad into my meeting with Global via Zoom. When I connected, Elliot was on the phone. Billy, he smiled at me. So good to see you today. Here's the thing. Alan has a meeting at 11:30, he'll be connected in a second, and would love to chat with you. With that, an image of Alan Jordan appeared on the screen. Good morning, Billy, he said with a genuine smile. I'm glad you found some time today. Tell me a little about yourself, he began. I began to tell him about my business, and he listened politely while I outlined what I had been doing since I left the NFL. I assumed that was what he wanted to know. Do you still follow the NFL, Billy? He asked. I was somewhat surprised by the question. Yes, sir, I replied. Billy, please call me Alan, he said to me with a smile. Do you think the 49 ARs will make the playoffs? He asked. And pretty quickly we had a conversation as casual as a buddy over a pint of beer. Finally, Elliot interrupted the conversation. Alan, they're asking for you in the conference room. It was 11:50. We chatted for the rest of the meeting. Billy, it was a pleasure to meet you and I look forward to working with you. And then he left. I chatted with Elliot some more about some of the details, and we made plans to talk again on Friday. My overall impression of Alan Jordan was very positive, and I was sure I wanted to seal the deal with Global. Meanwhile, the joy of meeting Global was tempered by my mission today. I was trying to find out if my wife was cheating on me. I was standing in front of her house. If someone had told me a few months ago that I would be doing this, I would have laughed. Now there was nothing funny about it. I spent a long, boring day observing practically nothing. Finally, around 6 in the evening, when it was getting dark, I saw Madeline come out of her building and get into her car. Finally, some activity at least. I was a little nervous following her. Was she really heading to meet Tiffy? I would find out soon enough. In the Seattle traffic, I somehow managed to keep up with her. She started down a familiar route, and I exhaled a little. It looked like she was headed home, to Madison Park. That was positive, but maybe she was just going home first and then somewhere else. I saw her pull up in the driveway, get out of the car, and go into the house. I sat there and waited. Our neighborhood was quiet, nothing much going on. A boring hour and a half passed, almost 8 hours, when it became clear that she had gone out for the night. A thought occurred to me. Since she was home, I could call her and tell her I caught an early flight and would be home soon. She and I could have a long, meaningful conversation and hopefully repair our relationship. In the swirl of emotions I was experiencing, there was a sudden positivity. With cautious optimism, I pulled out my phone and was about to call her when I suddenly saw headlights speeding down the street. A gleaming Range Rover quickly pulled into my driveway. Tiffy stepped out of it. He walked straight to the front door and entered, without a bell or knock, as if it was his house. The optimism I had felt for a short time evaporated. I was left with a dull pit in my stomach. I was 90% sure my marriage was over. To top it all off, I began to get angry at the familiarity with which he drove up to my driveway and entered my house. I continued to watch my house. I saw the kitchen light come on and I figured they were in the kitchen now. If I wanted to catch them in the act, I would need to give them time to get into their seat. After 20 minutes, I saw the lights in the kitchen go out, and then the lights in the interior of the house came on and went out. Presumably, they were coming up the stairs. Soon I saw that the light was on in the master bedroom, located at the end of the hallway on the second floor. Is she having fun with him in our bedroom? After a few minutes, the light in the bedroom dimmed. Okay, I thought. Let's give them 10 minutes and then barge in and confront them? I began to think deeper and darker. The seeds of an idea began to dawn. When I bought this house, there was a lot of stuff left over from the previous occupants. Much of it I had already thrown out, but the basement was still a work in progress. I remembered the fishing tackle in the storage closet in the corner of the basement across from the laundry room. Yeah, I thought, that could work. I waited, giving them another 15 minutes. I went over the plan in my head, looking for flaws. I couldn't find any. Quietly, I got out of the Nissan and headed for the side door farthest from the master bedroom. I knew every creak and squeak in this house. I knew how to navigate every sign. I crept silently inside and headed for the basement first. Using my iPhone flashlight, I found what I needed without turning on any lights. There was a back staircase in my house. At the very top of the stairs were the old servants' quarters. This room was now being used for my office. I was very familiar with this old, narrow staircase, and I crept up it, avoiding the noisier steps. Slowly and cautiously, I made my way silently down the hallway to the main front staircase. From the hallway, muffled sounds from the far bedroom reached me. I didn't need any other proof of Mandy's infidelity. What I heard could not be explained in any other way. Discreetly, I attached clear fishing line to the far post at the top of the stairs, about 6 inches from the ground. Then I tied it tightly around the near post, also about 6 inches off the ground. I tested it, and it was taut. Last, I turned the bulb in the sconces in the hall. Even when they turned on the switch, the bulb didn't light up. I went down the back stairs, went out the back door, and went to the far side of the garage. Then I made a phone call. Hello? Billy? Hi, Maddie. My voice was cheerful and upbeat. Good news. They put me on a late flight. I should be home in a few minutes. Are you home? I asked her. I heard her mumble something and hung up. I had to get the timing right. Then I crept up the back stairs and watched from the alcove in the hall. There were loud voices and noisy activity coming from the bedroom. I could imagine what was going on in there. Suddenly the door swung open, and I saw Tiffy in just socks, with his clothes clutched in his hands, running toward the stairs. I also saw Maddie heading for the hall bathroom. Washing off the evidence, I assumed. As Tiffy started hurrying down the stairs, the fishing line caught his bare foot, just as I had planned. He did a full somersault before falling to the bottom landing. I quickly cut the fishing line from the poles, slipped them into my pocket, and rushed down the back stairs. Halfway down the stairs, I heard his wounded cry. I hurried back to the rental, grabbed my unnecessary bag, walked to the front door, and entered. The inside of my house was in chaos. Tiffy in a crumpled heap at the foot of the stairs, Maddie standing at the top of the stairs looking down in a panic. I do the acting job of a lifetime, feigning confusion and demanding an explanation of what's going on. Billy, call 911, Maddie yelled. I looked over at Tiffy and he was definitely totally screwed up. The clothes he was clutching in his hands were strewn all over the stairs. His leg was clearly broken. Maddie, I asked, trying to sound confused. What the hell is going on here? I asked. Most of my reaction was real. The only thing I was faking was my confusion at what was happening. I knew exactly what had happened, and in fact, I was responsible for most of it. Billy, we can figure it all out, she told me, but we have to get Brandon to help. I froze for a moment and looked around my house. Tiffy had collapsed and was groaning, holding his leg. Maggie was standing at the top of the stairs. I noticed the darkness at the top of the stairs where I'd turned off the upstairs light. We'll have to fix that, I thought. Just then, I looked back at Maddie. She was looking at Tiffy with deep concern in her eyes. Humbled, I pulled out my phone and called 911. You better get a grip, I said solemnly to Maddie. Billy, I'm so sorry, she said, turning back to the bedroom. We can get through this. She called out to me. I walked up the stairs, ignoring Tiffy and his injury. I didn't have an ounce of compassion for the freak. If I thought I could get away with it, I would have kicked him in his injured leg. After making sure Maddie was out of sight, I screwed in the light bulb. Luckily, I also saw a small scrap of fishing line on the floor. I quickly picked it up. A few minutes later, the paramedics arrived, and Maddie came out of the bedroom getting dressed. 2 paramedics laid Tiffy on a stretcher. They asked me what happened, and I told them I had arrived after the accident. I directed them to Maddie, and she said she didn't know anything except that he had tripped coming down the stairs. Was he in a hurry for some reason? The paramedic asked Maddie. And she threw me a quick glance and replied that she didn't know if he was in a hurry. Eventually, the ambulance left, and Maddie and I were left alone. Oh, Billy, she started and cried. I'm so sorry about everything. She said this to me, crossed the floor, and began to hug me. My arms lay woodenly at my sides. I didn't respond to the hug. I pulled away from her touch. My stomach churned at the thought of her hugging Tiffy with the same arms that were now touching me. I'm going to check into a hotel tonight, I said in a quiet, stern voice. And I think you should stay somewhere else after tonight. I told her. No, Billy, please, we can work this out. She begged, tears streaming down her face. Billy, I'll make it all right. Please. She pleaded with me. What the hell was that asshole doing in my house? Then I looked at her in disgust. No, wait, I said. Even I can understand that. And shook my head and looked at her. Go away tomorrow, said I, and walked away. Billy, please, she begged. Let me try to explain. I want you out of my house by tomorrow. I shouted after her, turning around and walking away. Through the sadness and mishmash of emotions I felt as I drove to the hotel, one emotion shone through. Through all the sadness, heartache, and loss, I found myself mostly feeling anger. Anger at Maddie, of course, and certainly at Tiffy, but most of all, I was angry at Robert. He was the architect of this mess. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to learn that he'd subtly encouraged the affair with Tiffy. There would be payback. After a restless night at the hotel, with all those emotions getting in the way of a decent night's sleep, I finally gave in and took a shower. It was still early. I started making a list of things I needed to do and people I needed to talk to. At the top of the list was Landon, and then a thought hit me. Could I do this? I decided I could. She deserved it. No, let me correct myself. They deserved it. I made another call and set up a lunch appointment for today. I talked to Landon and told him that Maddie and I were getting a divorce. He was shocked and tried to talk me out of it. He asked me to take some time and think it over. He then started listing all of Maddie's positive qualities. Halfway through, I interrupted him. Landon, I said, I think the legal term is irreconcilable differences. She was having fun with Brandon Tiffy. Oh, was all he said. I see, that sheds a whole different light on things. He paused. You know who you have to thank, Landon added, and without waiting for my answer, he said, Maddie's dad. For what? I growled back at Landon. I hated Robert. He's the one who insisted on the prenup. He just saved you a few $1,000,000. Landon was right. I hadn't even considered the financial implications. Despite that, I still hated him. We met for lunch at Abraham's Delicatessen near the waterfront. It was a large, noisy establishment, and I didn't immediately notice her when they walked in. I focused on the beautiful woman with a great body walking beside her. Hey, big guy, she smiled and hugged me. Put your eyes back in your head. This is my partner, Stacy Bennedy. Nice to meet you, Stacy, I said. And Lisa, thanks for clearing up both of your points of view, and thanks for meeting me at the last minute. I called Lisa Katz at the Seattle Times this morning, and luckily she was free for lunch. It's Stacy's birthday today, and we were already planning to have lunch. Now you're going to pay. She laughed and told me. We looked over the menu, and after a moment she turned to me with a curious look on her face. What was so urgent that you wanted to discuss with me? She asked. She asked. She asked. Sen, I told her that there was a little story behind what I wanted to tell her. She asked me to take my time. I told her about Maddie's interest in local politics and that her father had encouraged her to get more involved. First, I told her that it was okay and that I had been actively involved when she ran for city attorney. Then I told her how her father had replaced Bud Waxman and brought in Brandon Tiffy. I didn't go into all the details, but I told her that I had learned that Maddie and Tiffy were having an affair. I hinted that her father may have encouraged the relationship. Along the way, I explained that her father had never loved me. I'm not sure this is even worth discussing, I began. But if she's asking voting citizens to trust her, it's pretty hypocritical when her husband can't do it anymore. Lisa propped her chin up with one hand and stared at me, drumming her fingers on the table. You know our main political issue is Sunday. In it, the paper endorses who we think will be the best candidate for the November election. I'll tell you in confidence that we were planning to endorse Madeline. This could be a game changer. Can I call you if I need any more details? She asked. Sure, said I. Okay, thanks, big guy, I owe you one. She smiled at me as she and the voluptuous lesbian Stacy got up to leave. And thanks for lunch. I didn't procrastinate and finally got home a little after 5 p.m. A quick look around revealed that she had packed her things and was honoring my wish to stay away. I still hadn't heard from her, nor had I heard from Tiffy. Good, because I didn't care. The next day, Elliot Boucher from Global called. We discussed the proposal and a plan of how to proceed. The numbers were all pretty straightforward, and Landon told me I would become a rich man. One more detail, Elliot began, is your employment contract with Global. I found an opening at one of our local companies. Alan wants you to take a senior position. Don't worry, I'll instruct you. How about we set a start date of November 10th? He asked. Later that day, I received a text from Maddie asking if we could meet and sort it all out. I wanted to reply, deal with the fact that you had fun with that asshole in our bed. But I didn't. I needed time to sort out my feelings. I kept wondering if there were any circumstances under which I could forgive her for what she had done. And no matter how many times I looked at the situation from different angles, I eventually came to an answer to that question. What she did was unforgivable, and I could never trust her again. Despite that conclusion, I still wasn't ready to talk to her. Not ready yet. I let her know that. On Saturday, I got a call from her brother Ryan. My dad is furious, he told me. He partially blames my sister and Brandon, but for some reason he blames you. He continued. My sister is upset, and my dad keeps telling her to keep her cool until after the election. After that, he says, we can work out the problems in the marriage. My dad is so focused on this election that everything else is taking a back seat. Ryan commented. He even told her that she deserves better than you. That was like the Robert I knew so well and hated. It led to a big fight between Madeline and my father. I've never seen her so angry with him. What happened to that asshole, Tiffy? I asked Ryan. He's still in the hospital. It's pretty bad. They say it will be months before he can walk unaided, he told me. One more thing, our compliance department is scrutinizing his client account. I've heard there are irregularities in there. Not even my father can keep him out of it. The emotion I experienced upon learning about Tiffy is called Schadenfreude. Strictly translated, it means to rejoice in another's grief. What a beautiful word. Another weird thing, Ryan told me. Brandon insists he tripped over something when he was coming down the stairs. Madeline doesn't know what he's talking about. I was glad it was a phone call and couldn't hold back a smile. I thanked Ryan and started thinking about how I really needed to talk to Maddie at some point. Just not quite yet. The texts and phone messages started coming in shortly after 6 Sunday morning. I tried to sleep so I wouldn't get distracted, but there were too many of them. Finally, I got up and picked up my phone. 18 text messages, half of them from Maddie or her dad. The rest were mostly from numbers I didn't know. Her dad was cursing and threatening me. The messages from Maddie were more of the, how could I do that to her? Do I really hate her that much? Did I really realize what that would do to her variety? There were other similar thoughts. It took me a few moments to realize what had happened. Then suddenly it came to me. Lisa Katz's article was supposed to be in today's Seattle Times. It was their political endorsement issue. I quickly found it online. Wow. This is going to hurt, I realized, just when I saw the headline. Trust Madeline? How can we trust her if her own husband doesn't? Madeline Doucette Damon is running for city attorney, advocating for law and order, something this reporter believes our city needs. In her campaign, she is asking the residents of the city to trust her. In fact, trust Madeline. To get the job done is her campaign slogan. We have learned that Doucette Damon, who has been married for nearly 3 years, has been in an intimate relationship with her campaign manager, Brandon Tiffey. Is this the kind of trustworthy and honorable man you want leading the fight against crime in our city? I do too. While we don't think North Gustafson is a strong city attorney, we would prefer someone we can truly trust. City Attorney, the Seattle Times endorses Nord Gustafson. Lisa didn't pull this story. It could dash Maddie's political hopes. The election was just over a week away. According to the latest numbers, she was leading in the polls. I wonder how much of an impact this story will have on voters. Pondering this while text messages continued to make my phone vibrate, I hypothesized that the article would affect Maddie in several ways. Certainly, her chances of winning the race for city attorney are seriously jeopardized. Whereas a week ago it was almost a foregone conclusion, now her chances are 50-50ths at best. The other part of this, and perhaps far more damaging, was the public exposure of her affair with her campaign manager. No matter how it was handled, the situation looked tawdry. All of this was compounded by the scandal of Maddie's portrayal of trust, while she herself was involved in very unreliable sexual activity. None of this could be good for her professional reputation in her legal career. It made me focus on our marriage and how she had betrayed me. I wasn't thinking about politics anymore. I needed to plan my life forward. The tone of the text messages changed from how much I hurt her to more of an apologetic tone. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. You're the only man I love, etc. In the shadow of the fact that she was having fun with Tiffy, with his smug smile and white teeth, in my bed, it all seemed hollow to me. Her pleas had no effect on my decision about the state of our marriage. The week flew by quickly. I spoke with Elliot at Global several times and met with Landon to discuss the details of selling my business. There seemed to be a mountain of forms to sign. In the evenings, I tended to the house. It seemed lonely, and I had a few weak moments when I almost called Maddie, but every time I reached for the phone, my imagination brought me back to Tiffy's smiling face, and I hung up. That weekend, Rich, Leslie, Dallas, and his new girlfriend took me to the reef with them. It was just like old times. I paid attention to all the beautiful single girls, but I didn't do anything about it. Legally, I was still married, but emotionally, I was starting to consider being single. On Sunday night, 2 days before the election, I got a call from Lisa Katz. "Hey, big guy," she said as she greeted me. "Thanks to you and the big story I told, I'm the star of the newsroom for a couple days." "You're welcome," I said. "As a thank you, Stacy and I would like to take you out to dinner Tuesday night," she said. "Michelle at 7 o'clock. I've already made reservations for 3. "Great," I said, and then I wondered. Wait a minute, it's Election Tuesday. Isn't Michelle's at the Governor Hotel? That's where Maddie and her election party will be, said I with slight trepidation. Exactly, Lisa said. I'll see you there. And then she was gone. Michelle's restaurant was in the front lobby of the Governor's, and Maddie's election party was on the mezzanine level, one flight of stairs above. I was prepared for any possible confrontation, but hoped to avoid it. I'm pretty sure Lisa set the whole thing up in hopes that there might be some action she could witness firsthand. On election night, the nervousness of the various parties involved in the campaign was palpable in the hotel lobby. Our small group of 3 could be considered neutral, but interested. We would watch the unfolding drama from the sidelines. If possible, Stacy looked even better Tuesday night than when I first saw her. Lucky Lisa, I thought. We started with cocktails and then moved on to appetizers. Don't worry, big guy, the Times will pay that bill tonight, Lisa informed me. It became clear that she was in no hurry to go anywhere. She wanted that ringside seat to watch the joy and sorrow of the election. By 9 o'clock that evening, the results of most of the election were to be in. Lisa, Stacy, and I were having such a good time just talking and getting to know each other that I had almost forgotten about the excitement of the election results. Suddenly, rather abruptly, Lisa got up and excused herself to the restroom. I turned to a voluptuous Stacy and continued our conversation. Soon we were interrupted. You goddamn son. I heard a loud voice from a few feet away. You and your big goddamn Rhoda got me in this election. It was Robert. It wasn't just Robert, but Madeline, Ryan, Myra, and several members of Robert's entourage. I quickly looked around the group, expecting to see Tiffy on crutches among them. He wasn't there. Why should I sue you for slander, you goddamn asshole? He continued, and crowded toward our table. I hadn't often confronted Robert in the past because I didn't want to cause problems for Maddie and me, and I'd certainly never physically challenged him. That wouldn't be fair. But this jerk was in my personal space and was being physically aggressive. Then I stood up. Maddie's reaction to any confrontation no longer mattered. Robert was just under 6 feet, and while he wasn't fat, you couldn't say he possessed anything approaching a strong body. I, on the other hand, retained my physique, was 6 inches taller, and at least 25 years younger. I stood up. Not threateningly, but simply to emphasize our physical differences. Robert's aggressive impulse came to an abrupt halt when he noted my size. It was like a balloon that had been let out of the air. All the insulting chatter stopped. He threw one last angry glance at me, and muttering to himself, he and most of his company departed. At that moment, a revelation came over me. Robert was a bully. He was used to getting his way through bullying. I learned in high school that when you stand up to a bully, he becomes a coward. And that's exactly what happened. And then Maddie came over to our table. At this point, Lisa was still in the restroom, so it was just me and Stacy sitting across from each other at the table. Billy? She said, looking at me and then at Stacy. It was out of the question for her not to notice the large cleavage Stacy was showing off. She took another look back and forth, and then silent tears started streaming down her cheeks. My instinct told me to go over to her, comfort her, and explain that Stacy wasn't my date. But as soon as I thought about it, the image of Tiffy flashed through my mind. I didn't make a single move to comfort her. Just as she followed the rest of her group outside, Lisa appeared. I looked at her and realized from the smile on her face that she had faked her absence just as Robert, Maddie, and the rest of the crowd were descending the stairs to the mezzanine. I can't say for sure, but it seemed to me that she wanted it to look like the voluptuous Stacy and I were taking a walk alone and alone. North Gustafson got 61% of the vote, she told me. Wow, I thought. The Times article had done a lot of damage to Maddie's image. Part of me was saddened, but a much larger part of me was glad that all of Robert's dreams of being city attorney and then mayor were shattered. He sacrificed Maddie and my marriage to satisfy his own desire for power. And Maddie went along with it. Unforgivable. I drove home again with a mixture of emotions: sadness, anger, satisfaction, and confusion at how my life had changed. Shortly after arriving home, I got a text from Ryan. My dad is freaking out. Be careful, he has a handheld machine gun. For some reason, he sees you as the bad guy. Be careful. I double-checked and locked all the doors. I made a note to look for home security systems. On Wednesday, another text came in from Ryan. Hi, my sister keeps saying she needs to talk to you. Just a heads up. And then a text from Maddie. Billy, I really need to talk to you. Just us. Can I come over tonight? Please? Don't make me beg. I don't think she still knows how much her betrayal hurt me. I thought about all our plans and dreams, about bringing our family together in our home in Madison Park, watching our future children grow up, sharing the joy of parenthood with them. All of that future was ruined because of her ambition and her father's ambition. And Tiffy. I wondered how it all started. Her affair with Tiffy, how long it lasted, and how she thought it would work out. I decided to meet with her. I had a lot of questions that needed answers. I texted Maddie back and said 7:30 tonight at my house, and left it at that. I then made 2 more phone calls, the last one to my attorney Landon Kirsch. Almost immediately, I got a text from Maddie. Thanks, Billy. I love you. I didn't respond. I had a few things to do that day to get ready for tonight. By late afternoon, all the preparations were finished. My emotions jumped from sadness to anger, but in the end, I was overwhelmed with curiosity as to how things had gotten to the point where she was entertaining Tiffy in my bed. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. Madeline had definitely taken the time to clean herself up, and she had succeeded. But there was a shadow of sadness in her makeup and natural beauty that she couldn't hide. She came over to me for a hug, and I raised my hand in a stopping gesture. Maddie, we have a lot to talk about. I have a lot of questions, said I. She nodded obediently, and we walked to the living room. I sat down in the only chair, and Maddie settled on the couch. She looked at me expectantly. Okay, let's start with you telling me how it all started with Tiffy, I said in an even voice. Billy, it's over. None of that stuff matters. We have to work on our relationship. I don't care if I ever see Brandon again. He means nothing to me. Stop! I shouted at her. Just a few days ago you were upstairs. And I looked up at the ceiling. Having fun with him. Don't you dare tell me that doesn't mean anything. Okay, Billy, I'm sorry. I'll tell you anything you want to know, she replied, with tears starting to flow. Calming down again, I asked her to start from the beginning. It seems that, as I had suspected, Robert had arranged Tiffy's transfer to Seattle from Washington. Tiffy had a brash charisma that Robert seemed to buy into. Robert was constantly pushing Tiffy and Maddie toward each other. When Tiffy wasn't around, Robert would tell Maddie how impressive he was and that he and she were a great team. It was unclear at first whether he was talking about the team in a political sense or something more personal. Then Maddie admitted that she liked Tiffy almost immediately. He dressed in expensive suits and was impeccably groomed. It wasn't fair, but I'm sure my usual couch potato, sweatpants, and unshaven appearance was nothing compared to Tiffy's fancy suits and looks. And then they were often alone in the campaign's private office. It took me questioning Maddie to get her to admit that it was the same block where Tiffy lived. Robert seemed to encourage this togetherness. Apparently, they were at Tiffy's one night, at the campaign office, and got positive polling results. They had a few drinks, and it was a small celebration. The combination of alcohol and the elation of celebrating the positive news broke down any remaining barriers. That was the first night I slept with Brandon, admitted Maddie. Since then, Brandon, the campaign, my dad, my future political campaign, it's all become one. Maddie said, My marriage to you just seemed like a separate chapter in my life. I knew the affair with Brandon would end as soon as the campaign was over. Then I would be with you and live the life we talked about. She told me this amidst new waves of tears. She looked at me and started to get up to walk over to me. Wait a minute, I said. her sadness not affecting me. How is it that you and Tiffy ended up in my house and in my bed? Brandon always wanted to spend the night with me. When I found out you were going out of town, it was supposed to be our last night together. Brandon insisted on having it at our house. I don't know why. I knew why. He wanted to have the ultimate victory over me, to take my woman in my house and in my bed. Too bad he broke his neck falling down the stairs and not just his leg. Billy, you know the rest, she said, looking at me pleadingly. The most important thing right now is that we have a clear path forward, she added, looking at me hopefully. I glanced at my watch. About 2 more minutes. I stood up. I'll be right back, I told her, lingering. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Madeline, would you mind answering it? I called out from the kitchen. Muffled voices and a thin cry were heard from the entryway. I walked in and saw Maddie standing in the doorway, stunned. She knew from her legal career what the process of being served was like. She stood like a wooden person with a 9x12 envelope in her hand. Why? She asked, still not quite understanding the extent of my anger. You just asked me to give you a clear plan of how to proceed, I said, using her words and nodding at the envelope. That's as clear as I can get, I told her in all seriousness. At that moment, the doorbell rang again. Come in, I shouted. The door opened and Maddie, still stunned, saw Stacy Bennedy walk into my house, walk right up to me and kiss me. I'm going to go get a glass of wine before we go out, Stacy said, completely ignoring Maddie, but at the same time showing her awareness of where the kitchen was and where the wine was kept. Maddie stood with her mouth open and an envelope in her hands, shocked, watching my interaction with Stacy. Stacy, Lisa, and I had rehearsed this whole farce this afternoon. I called Lisa and reminded her of the favor she owed me. Then I explained what was on my mind. Lisa even suggested a kiss. But keep your mouth shut, big guy, she told me with a half-serious tone in her voice. Madeline was doubly stunned, first by the divorce and now by the arrival of a new woman in my life, or so it seemed to her. I wanted her to have some insight into the agony of betrayal I'd been through. I walked over to Maddie and, gently but firmly placing my hand on her back, led her to the door. Billy, why? She asked, stunned by this turn of events. Maddie, I just stopped trusting you, I said. Good luck with your future, I said, and quietly closed the door. Even through the closed, massive door, I could hear her sobbing outside on the walkway in front of the house. I still cared about her, and I still had strong feelings for Maddie, but no matter how hard I worked at it, there was no way I could live my life with her without trusting her. Next chapter. Monday morning was my first day on the job at Global. I was nervous, but not really nervous. You could say I was a little worried, but nothing more than that. I was in my new office and Elliot was talking to my new team. In all the time Madeline and I had been together, I had never been in those offices. Of course, her father had never invited me. Elliot and I met over the weekend. It was interesting to hear from him that Global wanted me to work in their ISC office in downtown Seattle, the same office where Robert and Ryan worked, and of course Tiffy. I told the whole story of my marriage, my quest for political office, Madeline's betrayal, her father's involvement, and of course Tiffy. Elliot asked me if I could work at ISC. I said yes, but I couldn't work with Tiffy. Don't worry, he, Elliot sighed, has been relieved of his duties. In fact, we're looking for Mr. Tiffy right now. His client accounts are quite irregular. Apparently, he left his hospital bed over the weekend and checked out. The FBI uses the term embezzlement. Don't worry, we'll find him, assured me Elliot. I sat at my desk in my new office and waited for Elliot's signal, mentally rehearsing what I wanted to say. That's when he poked his head through my door. Showtime, he said, and led me into a conference room. There were 8 people in the conference room. The windows on the west side of the room overlooked downtown Seattle. There was an oblong smoked glass table with all 8 people sitting around it. Entering the room following Elliot, the soft hum of conversation ceased. There was silence for a moment, and then I was suddenly recognized. Robert and Ryan, at least. What the hell is he doing here? Began Robert, Get that son of a bitch out of here. A quick, stern look from Elliot Boucher interrupted Robert's surprised comments. Everyone, Elliot addressed the group, meet our new sales manager, Billy Damon. Global recently acquired Billy's real estate company, and Billy has agreed to become our real estate investment manager. Elliot continued. As we move forward in today's financial world of unprecedented opportunity, we know that a significant part of our strategy will be focused on increasing the value of real estate. Billy's experience will help us navigate the world of real estate and capital. Robert's face, already flushed, turned even redder. The rest of the group, including Ryan, looked interested and open to the new strategy. Billy, meet your team. Elliot made a sweeping gesture around everyone in the room. I took a deep breath and stood next to Elliot. Thank you, Elliot, I began. I look forward to meeting each and every one of you. Some of you, and I nodded towards Ryan. I already know. I smiled. The real estate business has been a success for me, and I expect the same success here at ISC. I know you've worked mostly with stocks and bonds, but I believe that real estate combined with traditional investments can provide a lucrative return for everyone. I turned to the group, looking everyone in the eye except Robert. He sat with his eyes staring at the ceiling, almost shaking with anger and indignation. I'll meet with each of you individually to discuss strategy, I said. But in the meantime, I'll ask for a weekly activity report to see how you're doing. I told them. The report is due every Monday by 8 a.m. No exceptions. Robert was in a quiet rage. So, I began, if nothing else, that's all I had for our group this morning, I said, walking out of the conference room. Elliot joined me in the office. So, I asked, interested in his opinion, how did I do? Not bad for a first-timer, he began. Maybe a little heavy, but that's okay. One thing might help me in the future. Bang! A loud, uncharacteristic sound came from somewhere on the side of my office. Elliot and I got up to find out what was going on. Alarmed footsteps sounded in the hallway. Suddenly, there was a shout and more shouting. We followed the commotion. We saw a group of people huddled around the open office door. A woman was crying. The others looked shaken. Oh, that's Robert's office, Elliot said quietly to me. None. Elliot and I walked through the small crowd and looked inside. I immediately turned away. There were blood spatters and gray matter on the wall behind his desk. Robert's body leaned back in the office chair, the gun still clutched in his hand. Someone call the police! Elliot shouted. Everyone else to the conference room. Andrea to building security. We need someone to guard the office door. The small group settled back around the conference table under very different circumstances than when we had been here just a few minutes before. Elliot said a few words, some members of the group became emotional, and I personally realized that at least some of the blame might be directed at me. For some reason, it was hard for me to feel terribly bad about this turn of events. I felt sorry for his family, but Robert was an exceptionally pompous and unpleasant person. Personally, I wouldn't miss him. My thoughts then turned to Ryan, Robert's son. How did he take this terrible tragedy? I studied Ryan. His face reflected a variety of emotions, and as I continued to watch him, I still couldn't discern one emotion: sadness. Next chapter. Many weeks passed, and things calmed down. I sent flowers to Myra, Robert's widow, and a note to Maddie. But I didn't attend the funeral. My note to Maddie triggered a new flurry of "we need to talk" messages, but I ignored them all. It was over, as painful as it was. Professionally, I was doing well and enjoying corporate life. And as Landon had informed me a few months ago, I was rich. But I was also bored. It was now Saturday night, and I was still unpacking boxes from when I first moved into the house in Madison Park. My thoughts returned to dreams of raising a family here and Maddie becoming a wife and mother. A new wave of muted sadness and anger swept over me. That scenario would never happen. Through one box, I found a photograph. A real paper photograph. I still remember that day vividly. It was an unnaturally warm September day, and we were alone at Priest Lake. We had gone on a day trip. For some reason, there was no football practice. There was a small sandy beach on the shore of the lake. At first, we just took off our shoes and dipped our toes into the cool water. The sensation was wonderful. "Billy, come here! The water is wonderful!" she said to me, laughing and splashing. We had a good time that day, and I remembered taking a picture of her with my digital camera as she came out of the lake. I just now found that picture. Suddenly, a thought hit me. The chances were slim, but who knows? I grabbed my phone and sent a text to her old number. Could she really still have the same number? Like I said, there was little chance. I put the phone away and continued with my business. Probably half an hour later, a reply came back. "Billy Damon, is that really you?" "Yeah." I replied that it was, and she said she'd been thinking about me lately. "Oh, really?" I wrote, "Why?" and replied, smirking at how things had turned out. "I'm in Seattle until Monday morning, and I knew you lived around here somewhere." I told her that yes, I did live in Seattle, that I would like to see her, and that she could have lunch tomorrow. This time, the pause before answering was longer. "Okay," she wrote. "How about brunch at 1 o'clock at Casabella? It was a nice bistro where we could have some privacy," I thought. "That won't work. You know how our schedules are." "How about 11:30? There's a Red Robin nearby. I'll send you the address." Red Robin was a pretty casual establishment, but that's okay. I'll meet her in the dining room if that's what she wants. I was excited. I knew it was only the first step, but Chrissy and I had always had a strong bond. The thought of Chrissy and I being together again entered my mind. The excitement made it hard for me to sleep that Saturday night. I got there at 11:30. It wasn't crowded at the door, but as I quickly looked around at the faces, I saw Chrissy, beautiful as ever, waving at me among the people. I excitedly waved to her, and just as I got closer, I noticed a smiling, dark-haired guy with glasses next to her. She was holding his hand. He had a baby in his arms. I tried to hide the surprise on my face. "Billy," she said, "how long ago it was?" and hugged me, quickly pulling away. "Billy, this is my husband Wes and our daughter Audrey. She's almost 9 months old and she's already crawling," she told me. "You knew I was married, didn't you?" she asked, perhaps sensing my momentary confusion. "Of course," I lied. As my distant fantasies of a life with Chrissy crumbled, I realized I had to do the right thing, bought them lunch, and was pleasant. I hated to say it, but Wes was a really nice guy, and deep down I was happy for Chrissy, but sad for myself. No, unfortunately this story ends without me finding a new love, but I guess that will be in the next chapter. Hopefully it will be a little shorter next time. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.